North Korea is usually considered the worst country on earth. A hereditary dictatorship, total censorship, prison camps, an entire population trapped behind one of the most closed borders on the planet. For decades, the Kim regime has been the global benchmark for absolute authoritarian control. But here's the uncomfortable truth. North Korea may actually not be the worst, because scattered across the world are regimes that have developed their own versions of absolute control. Systems that are sometimes even more invasive, more bizarre, or more psychologically suffocating than anything in Pyongyang. Countries where the state doesn't just rule society, it attempts to replace reality itself. Today, we are going to examine 3 countries that may actually be worse than North Korea and the disturbing systems that keep millions of people trapped inside of them. To understand just how extreme these 3 regimes are, we need to first understand what North Korea actually looks like from the inside, because the baseline is brutal. The Kim dynasty has been in uninterrupted power since 1948. Every citizen is born into a rigid caste system called Songbun, which is a social classification inherited from ancestors who either supported or opposed the regime during the Korean War. Your Songbun determines where you live, whether you go to university, whether you get a decent job, and, in many cases, whether you eat. It follows you from birth to death, and there is absolutely no mechanism to change it. The guilt of one family member becomes the burden of everyone connected to them across generations. Somewhere around 192,000 people were held in North Korea's political prison camps in the first half of 2025. Facilities where detainees are subjected to forced labor, starvation rations, and systematic torture. Many are there not because of anything that they personally did, but because a family member was considered disloyal. 3 generations of a single family can be imprisoned for the political crime of one grandfather. The state controls every aspect of public life. There are government-approved hairstyles. Listening to South Korean music can get you executed. Watching foreign films can send your entire family to a camp. In 2020, Kim Jong-un passed a law making it a capital offense to possess outside media. The punishment is death, carried out in public in front of crowds that are required to watch. By almost any measure, North Korea is one of the most controlled societies in human history. And yet, the machinery of authoritarian control, it didn't stop in Pyongyang. Other regimes have studied it, adapted it, and in some cases, took it somewhere even darker. To understand how, we need to look at every common toolkit every authoritarian regime relies on. Personality cults that position the leader as godlike and infallible. State-controlled media that drowns out every alternative voice. Surveillance networks that turn citizens against each other. Forced labor systems that trap entire generations in service to the state. And ideological indoctrination so total that citizens eventually stop questioning the system. Not because they fear the consequences, but because they can no longer imagine any other way to live. These are the building blocks, the raw materials of repression. Every dictatorship on the list uses some version of them. But the 3 countries we're about to examine haven't just used these tools, they've refined them, weaponized them in new directions, and in doing so, created systems that are in critical ways more extreme, persistent, and more psychologically invasive than the regime the world is fixated on. The first country on this list may be the strangest dictatorship ever constructed. Turkmenistan sits in Central Asia. It's sandwiched between Iran and Afghanistan, with the Karakum Desert covering most of its territory. Now, for most people, it barely registers as a place. That obscurity is part of what allowed one of the most extraordinary personality cults in history to flourish there almost entirely out of the world's view. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a former Communist Party official named Sapar Niyazov took power. He didn't just become president, he declared himself Turkmenbazi, the father of all Turkmen, and then proceeded to systemically rebuild the country around his own image. He renamed the months of the calendar. January became Turkmenbazi, after himself. April became the name of his mother. The days of the week have been renamed after members of his family. This wasn't metaphorical control. He literally restructured time. But the most staggering instrument of Niyazov's rule was a book that he wrote called Runama, the Book of the Soul. He positioned it not as a political text, but as a divine piece of scripture. He claimed it had been written with direct inspiration from God, and that any citizen who read it 3 times would be guaranteed entry into heaven. That claim would have been delusional theater anywhere else. But in Turkmenistan, it became law. The Runama was made mandatory curriculum in every school. University students could not pass their exams without demonstrating mastery of its content. Government employees were tested on its passages as a condition of employment. To get a driver's license, you sat an exam on the Runama's teachings. A giant mechanical version of the book was built in central Ashgabat. Every night it opened and its pages were read aloud through speakers into the darkness. And then there's Ashgabat itself. With revenue from Turkmenistan's massive natural gas reserves, Niyazov transformed the capital into a physical monument to his own power. The city holds a Guinness World Record: 543 buildings clad in white marble across 4.5 million square meters, making it the highest density of white marble-clad buildings on the planet. The streets are immaculate, architecture monumental, and behind the gleaming white facade, the country has a 60% unemployment rate, according to independent media. The centerpiece of this marble mirage was a 39-foot golden statue of Niyazov, rotating on its axis so the leader's face always pointed toward the sun. When Niyazov died in 2006, the world expected reform, but instead, it got a sequel. His successor, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, kept the marble, kept the personality cult. He softened a few of the more cartoonish edicts. Dogs and beards were allowed again, but he added his own obsessions. He commissioned a 600-ton marble horsehead atop the Olympic Stadium. His portrait appeared on every taxi dashboard and newspaper front page in the country. He published his own series of books, which citizens were expected to study. He established a holiday dedicated to his favorite dog breed, and in 2022, he handed the presidency to his son, Serdar, completing the transformation from personality cult to outright dynasty. But the most unsettling development is what's happening right now. The regime is building Arkadag, a $5 billion smart city named after the elder's title, which translates as the Protector. Marketed as a hub of sustainable innovation, Arkadag integrates real-time data collection on traffic, public services, and daily activity through a unified intelligent network. In a country with no independent press and a heavily restricted internet, the smart infrastructure is something else entirely. It's a digitized surveillance grid, built from the ground up, in a state where no one is allowed to report on what it actually does. North Korea's censorship is brutal, but Turkmenistan has constructed an entire aesthetic reality. A marble city built on gas money and silence that makes the system almost impossible to see from the outside. But bizarre authoritarianism, as extreme as it is, isn't actually the most suffocating kind. The next country doesn't attempt to colonize the mind with a book. It colonizes the body, and it starts with children. Eritrea is a small nation on the Horn of Africa, sitting on the Red Sea coast between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Djibouti. It gained independence in 1993 after a devastating 30-year war with Ethiopia. And its president, Isaias Afewerki, has held power without a single election ever since. He was hailed as part of a new generation of African leaders. The liberation war was over, and the future was supposed to be open. But instead, he closed it. In the years that followed independence, rather than building a free society the liberation movement had promised, Afewerki built something else entirely. A constitution was written, but it was never implemented. Elections were scheduled, but they were never held. And when a group of senior government officials, men and women who fought beside Afewerki for decades, published an open letter in 2001 calling for democratic reform, they were arrested within weeks. Several of them are believed to still be in detention today. Others are assumed to be dead. No charges, no trials, no information. He built a garrison. Every citizen in Eritrea is subject to national service. On paper, the law specifies 18 months of compulsory military duty. But in reality, documented by United Nations Human Rights Watch and verified accounts from thousands of people who have fled the country, national service in Eritrea is indefinite. Men up to age 60, women up to 27 are compelled to serve the state as the state sees fit, typically performing manual labor in agriculture, construction, and mining for pay so low it barely constitutes payment at all. The UN Commission of Inquiry has described the system, without qualification, as enslavement. But here's where it gets even darker, and where Eritrea begins to separate itself from almost every other regime on Earth. The state doesn't wait until citizens are adults to begin the process. All students, male and female, must complete their final year of high school at Sawa, a remote military camp in the western desert. At Sawa, the boundary between education and military conscription is erased. Students prepare for national exams while simultaneously undergoing military drills under the command of officers reported for systematic brutality. Many of the young people processed through Sawa are children, and for many, particularly young women, the psychological trauma of the conditions is so severe that clinicians have documented mass outbreaks of conversion disorder, a condition where extreme psychological stress manifests as physical neurological symptoms, paralysis, numbness, seizures, with no physical cause. The body, in other words, breaks down under what the mind can no longer absorb. Thousands of young Eritreans flee the country every month. The border is patrolled with shoot-to-kill orders. Many who make it out cross the Sahara and the Mediterranean, and many don't survive the journey. And yet they keep coming, because to those who live inside the system, the risk of a dangerous escape is preferable to the certainty of indefinite conscription. In the 2025 RSF World Press Freedom Index, Eritrea ranked 180th out of 180 countries, dead last on the planet. Below North Korea, which ranked 179th, and there's not a single independent media outlet in the entire country. All have been banned since 2001. Journalists have been held in detention without charge or trial for over 20 years. And if you think leaving the country means leaving the regime behind, you haven't heard the most chilling part yet. If you're an Eritrean living abroad, in London, Toronto, Berlin, the regime still has its hand in your pocket. The state levies a 2% tax on all income earned by Eritreans in the diaspora, known officially as the Recovery and Rehabilitation Tax. Refusing to pay doesn't just mean paperwork problems, it means your passport can't be renewed. It means your family members still living in Eritrea may lose access to food vouchers and essential services. Embassies and regime-linked networks actively monitor, harass, and intimidate Eritreans overseas who are perceived as disloyal. The European Parliament has documented this. Amnesty International has documented this. British parliamentary committees have taken evidence on it. North Korea guards its borders with watchtowers and landmines. Eritrea follows its citizens to democratic countries and extracts payments from them there. The prison has no walls. It just has a very long reach. If you're finding this hard to believe, subscribe to Fall of Nations, because what's coming next is, in some ways, the most insidious system of all. A dictatorship that didn't build a wall or rename a calendar, it recruited your neighbors. Cuba has existed in a peculiar political space in Western consciousness for decades. Revolutionary mythology, cigars, classic cars, and a kind of romanticized resistance. But beneath the imagery, the Cuban state has built one of the more granulated, psychologically penetrating systems of social control ever conceived. One that other authoritarian regimes may not be able to replicate because it depends on something they can't manufacture. It depends on trust and what happens when the state systematically destroys it. It all started in 1960. 1 year after the revolution, Fidel Castro announced the creation of the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, the CDR. The stated purpose was to protect the revolution from internal sabotage. The actual function was to turn every neighborhood in Cuba into a surveillance unit. The CDR is organized by city block. Every block has a committee, and every committee has a president. That president is responsible for maintaining detailed files on every single resident in their jurisdiction, recording who visits their home, how often, how many packages they receive, their work performance, political opinions, their family history, and what the committee president personally assesses as their level of, quote, revolutionary moral character. That information flows directly to the Department of State Security. By 2010, 8.4 million Cubans, out of a population total of 11.2 million, were registered CDR members. The eyes and ears were everywhere, because they were everyone. And the information that those files contain is not just background noise. It determines outcomes. A CDR report can block access to state employment, which in Cuba means almost all employment. It can deny a student entry to university. It can prevent a citizen from obtaining a travel permit. One critical comment recorded on a neighborhood file could follow a person for decades. But the CDR is only half of the system. The other half is something the Cuban state calls actos de repudio, acts of repudiation. When a dissident, a human rights activist, or someone who hasn't requested permission to emigrate draws the attention of the state, the regime doesn't just send police. It mobilizes the neighborhood. Groups of revolutionary citizens, coordinated through CDR networks and rapid response brigades, surround the target's home. They shout, throw objects, assault. These are not spontaneous expressions of community outrage. They're state-choreographed operations designed to accomplish something that police alone cannot, to make their target feel that not just the government, but their own street, their own neighbors, their own community have turned against them. In July of 2021, Cuba experienced the largest popular uprising since the 1959 revolution. Tens of thousands of people across dozens of cities took to the streets, chanting freedom and homeland and life. The state's response was overwhelming. Hundreds of arbitrary arrests, protesters sentenced to decades in prison, and a systematic crackdown that continues to this day. According to Human Rights Watch's 2026 World Report, the repression shows no sign of easing. And the regime didn't stop there. In 2022, a new penal code dramatically expanded the state's ability to criminalize online speech. A social communication law followed in 2023, giving authorities sweeping new powers over digital content. The state-controlled telecommunications monopoly, or ITEXA, has raised internet data prices to levels that regularly exceed the average monthly minimum wage, ensuring that the poorest Cubans can't afford to access information or organize online. The result is a system where every layer of life is an instrument of control. The neighborhood watches, the file records, the mob repudiates, the law criminalizes, the internet becomes unaffordable. There are no walls in Cuba, but there is nowhere to stand where the system cannot see you. And when you step back and look at all three countries together, a disturbing pattern emerges. And it tells us something about where authoritarian control is headed globally. North Korea built its system around geographic isolation. Walls, fences, darkness. The world could see the brutality from satellite images, but it was contained, sealed. Its cruelty is visible precisely because it has to be so physical, so literal. The wire, the camp, the border guard with orders to shoot. Turkmenistan built its system around manufactured reality. Marble, mythology, a rotating golden statue, and now a smart city that monitors daily life while the rest of the world barely knows the country exists. Repression made invisible by spectacle. Eritrea built its system around permanent extraction, labor, money, people, and then extended it across international borders, turning exile itself into a form of continued control. There's no outside. There is no escape point at which the regime's grip loosens. Cuba built its system around human psychology, recruiting ordinary citizens to surveil, report on, and physically attack their own neighbors, creating a society where the apparatus of repression has no uniforms, no headquarters, and no central building that you can point to and say, this is where the oppression lives. It lives on the block, on the committee, in the file. The Kim regime is monstrous. No honest analysis disputes that. But here's what these three countries show us: that authoritarianism is not static. It evolves. It learns. It finds new efficiencies. It disguises itself. The Turkmen regime learned that manufactured prosperity can be more durable than manufactured fear. That a population dependent on state-provided gas and electricity is a population that won't risk disrupting the system. The Eritrean regime learned that conscription scales, that if you claim every citizen as state property from the moment they turn 18, you never run out of labor. You never have to worry about who might organize against you. The Cuban regime learned that the most cost-effective surveillance network ever built is the one your citizens build themselves, and that turning neighbors into informants doesn't just collect intelligence, it destroys the social trust that makes resistance possible. And now, as technology matures, as smart cities proliferate, as digital communication laws expand, as diaspora monitoring becomes more sophisticated, these systems are not becoming less extreme. They are becoming more efficient, more exportable, more invisible. North Korea may be the most famous dictatorship on earth, but the machinery of absolute control has been quietly evolving in Ashgabat, in Asmara, and in Havana. And in some ways, what they've built is more persistent, more invasive, and harder to escape. So here's the question we're sitting with. If three countries have already moved beyond North Korea in their methods of control, what does the next generation of authoritarianism look like? And are we paying enough attention to stop it? Let us know what you think in the comments, and subscribe to Fall of Nations, because wherever nations are falling, we will be covering it.